John Chandler Shanks is the fourth child and first son of John and Mary Shanks and was born January 25, 1867, just following the Civil War in Clarke County, Mississippi. In the 1880 census, he is listed as a farm laborer, right along with his three older sisters, Mary, Rebecca, and Savannah, and his younger brother, James William. After John Shanks died in 1881, the family all left the farm they had grown up on in Shibuda, Clarke County, Mississippi, and moved away to other parts of Mississippi and Louisiana. In 1900, John and brother George are found living in St. Tammany Parish, Louisiana, working as saloon keepers at the hotel owned by August Planche. At this time, brother James William is living in Abbeville, working as a school principal and a lawyer. Catherine Kate Chevis is found on page 25 of the 1900 census for Abbeville, Louisiana, all north of Iberia plus Vermilion RR to Bayou Vermilion. She is 32 years old, single, living with her widowed mother, Virginia Cook Chevis. Kate is listed as a schoolteacher and is the youngest daughter of the late Dr. H.T. Chevis, a local physician of some note. On the next page, 26, is James William, living with his wife Minnie and 5-year-old son Dewitt in the same area. He is listed on the census as a lawyer, but an obituary for his infant son, who was born and died later that year, says he was also the principal of the local school. John Chandler has not yet been found on a census for Abbeville, but it seems quite possible that his brother James invited him to come live in Abbeville and perhaps meet an unmarried local schoolteacher he and his wife knew from a prominent family. John and Kate were married not long after that 1900 census and had 3 children. The New Orleans Times-Democrat reported in July 1903 that C.J. Ferre sold his mercantile business to John Shanks in the form of his stock and goodwill. By 1910, they are living in Sulfur, Calcasieu Parish, Louisiana, and John is a laborer in a sulfur mine. Her obituary says that Kate died in Sulfur after a lingering illness in 1912. She is buried at the Graceland Masonic Cemetery in Abbeville. The children all moved with John, first to Kinder, Louisiana, and then to the Houston, Texas area after the death of their mother in 1912. Virginia Chevis Shanks is seen in the 1920 census as a roomer on Alamo Stay in Houston and working in an office as a runner. She married Albert Glenn Elkins, 1900-1962 in 1921, who was from Brazoria County and worked in the grocery business. They had a young son, Albert Glenn Jr., who died at age 4 in 1927. Later they had a child, John Preston Elkins, 1936 to 1986, who had a family in Lake Jackson, Texas. In the 1930 census, Glenn's parents, James and Emma, are living in Precinct 7 of Brazoria County. He is working at a dairy. Glenn and Virginia live next door. Virginia and Glenn were living in rural Alvin in 1960 when she died of a heart attack in the hospital in Galveston, and he followed her 2 years later. They are both buried in Jones Creek in Brazoria County. Their son, John Preston, is seen in the 1930 census living in a boarding house on Fannin Steed in Houston and working in a hardware store as a clerk. He married Mary Louise Maddox around 1935, and they had 2 children. Son John Preston Jr. married Nancy Holsomback in 1963 and had sons John Preston III and Andrew Christopher. John Sr.'s sister Patricia Louise married Charles Weisinger in 1957, and they had 3 children, Catherine Louise, Richard Kyle, and Cynthia Jean. Mary Kathleen met and married an oil driller from Rusk, Texas, named Gilbert McNair around 1925, and they had had 2 daughters, Marilyn, who married Gilbert Clem Watt in 1959, and Barbara Jean, called Bobby, who married Richard Edwin Ernst, and they had children Elise, Leslie, and Dow. The 1930 census shows Gilbert and Mary living on Orange Avenue in Orange, Texas. 63-year-old John Chandler Shanks is living with them, as is listed with mechanic as his occupation. When he died 3 years later, he would be buried at Gulf Prairie Cemetery, a.k.a. Peach Point, Jones Creek, Brazoria, Texas, where most of his daughter's husband's family buried.